All right, so these lectures are probably going to be very weird, but it is what it is. So, as I said, I had a lot of opportunities to have sex, but I didn't have sex until I was 23 years old. Now, just one example, though, was I told my friend a FOM that I was staying with when I was a senior that I had sex at his house, but I didn't really. I just said that because I wanted to seem cool, you know? But that's another story. But so like I said, in college, I had this one opportunity where I could have had sex, where I was in this room with this girl and she, wanted to have sex with me, it seemed. And but then my grandpa called me, and again I saw this as a sign. My grandpa called me. So I picked up the phone and I started talking to my grandpa. I was like, that was a sign that I shouldn't have sex. But, I didn't want to have sex because, again, in my mind, I was thinking, I'm the Messiah. I knew my whole life that I was a Messiah, and I knew that I was going to discover something big. And it's kind of crazy that I hadn't discovered it yet, but I was still following, I had opportunities to have sex with attractive women, but I didn't. So, one other example, like I said, my Asian friend, Brian, he was like, dude, how come you didn't have sex with that Asian girl? Because I could have had sex with that Asian girl. And I told him, I was trying to, because I was trying to follow my grandpa's teachings, that the body's an illusion, but also, if you have sex with someone outside of marriage, and you can become attached and stuff like that. So, and again, during this time, it was very weird because I was trying to find, I was following synchronicities and I was following signs, and it got to the point where, let's just say there was a lot of synchronicities going on. And this was especially my sophomore year of college. My sophomore year of college, I was following all these synchronicities. One had to do with crows. If there was a white bird, like a seagull, and I heard a white bird's the seagull making its cause, or seagull making the noises that the seagull makes, that was a good sign, and that would tell me that I should continue to do what I'm doing. Now, people will say that this is schizotypal, or this is an aspect of schizophrenia where there's too much saliency, where you're looking for meaning in things that don't have meaning. And people say that this is an aspect of mental illness where you start to, see you start to confuse your internal reality and your external reality, where I believe that the external reality is giving me signs, or even that my internal reality is affecting the external reality. My mind is affecting reality. But what's interesting is my grandpa actually, my grandpa's teacher, Dr. Hora, and at the time I didn't know that, but that's what he actually taught. He taught that you create your reality, literally. So in a sense, I was following what my grandpa's teacher taught, but I didn't know that at the time. But I saw reality as kind of like a dream. So, and it's interesting because my grandpa's teacher even had a book, Beyond the Dream, where he kind of said reality is like a dream and that the physical universe is an illusion, but he kind of saw it as a hologram. But my grandpa would say that everything is energy, and my grandpa tried to make things very scientific, but I'll get to that, how my grandpa ended up confusing me. And why I think that my grandpa ended up trying to become more rational, because my grandpa didn't want me to go off the deep end, but I'll get to that. That's another story. But so I was, I saw signs if a white bird was making noises, I would be writing. I would be doing writing about, like I said, I would have conversations with people. This is my sophomore year. And I would write down my conversations with people because I saw myself as like Socrates. And I would have these conversations and have dialogues. And I would be following signs. For instance, if I saw a white bird, if I saw a seagull, then I would continue doing what I'm doing. But if I saw a blackbird, if I saw a raven, or I heard ravens, I would stop doing what I'm doing. And if I'm walking one way and I heard the ravens, I would start walking the other way. Or if I heard the seagulls, I would continue walking that way. And so I started just following external, because I was seeing reality as a dream, and I saw the universe or God or whatever you want to call it as guiding me. And I ended up discovering the quadrant model, kind of doing this stuff. So, and like I said, I was following all these synchronicities. All these synchronicities were going on. And it was incredible. I would be writing, and the last word I wrote was my friend Pat. And I went to get some food, and then I bumped into Pat. But I didn't even realize the last word I wrote was Pat. And then I had some synchronicity with a raven. And then I would go back to my book to what I was writing, and it said the last word was Pat, and I just ran into Pat. But it was stuff like this, but it was way more, if you really understood, because I can't explain the experiences I had, but if people experienced what I experienced, they would know reality is an illusion. Reality is like a dream. But I can't even remember the details, but it was getting so crazy, where synchronicities that were out of control. And I felt like reality was so. But now people would say, no, you're just schizotypal, because I was like having, like I would have synchronicities where I would say free, and I'd look up and it would say free, and it would be related to something, that was going on in my life related to freedom. And okay, so people would say this is schizotypal, that I was starting to, it was magical thinking. But I really, possibly I really was experiencing that. But, also people say that that's an aspect of trauma. So maybe because of the trauma that I was going through, I started to disassociate and started to get involved, become quote unquote schizophrenic. But I don't think so. Now, it's possible that I was going that way, but I ended up discovering the theory of everything. And I think, if anything, that saved me, discovering the theory of everything from going down. But all in all, I do think that I was kind of losing it a little bit, because it was getting to the point where I was following signs. So another thing I would follow was like, if people were, okay, I'll get to that later. But yeah, so I was following synchronicities and stuff, right? Because I saw reality as like a dream. I wasn't tied down to the materialistic, scientific way of viewing reality. I was looking at reality as like a dream in a spiritual lens. Okay, so I was looking for cues in the environment to tell me what to do. And and it was getting to the point where it was becoming magical thinking. Like I remember I opened a door, like I just went to the door and I opened it, and my friend Brian was there, and Brian was like, "Whoa." He was like, "You knew I was here?" And in my mind, I was telling myself, maybe I did know he was there. Which people say is an aspect of schizotypal, where I'm starting to think that I can, sense people's presences. And I'm doing things that, so maybe I was tapping into or getting in touch with some sort of spiritual dimension or something. Now, but people will say that I was just losing my mind, that I was becoming, that this was an aspect of schizotypal personality disorder, or perhaps schizophrenia, that I was starting to become schizophrenic, but I don't think so. Now, yeah, maybe because of all the trauma I went through, that there was some sort of dissociation going on, and I was starting to, that reality had become overwhelming, and I was seeing, there was too much saliency, where I was trying to see meaning in every little thing. But at the same time, though, I ended up discovering the theory of everything. So anyways, now this is the weird part. This is a weird lecture. So I was doing that at that time. But it wasn't schizophrenic to the point where people knew what I was doing. I wasn't telling people what I was doing, and I was still functioning, and I was still getting good grades. I was still functioning. And I ended up graduating from UCSD with a 3.1 GPA. So if I was schizophrenic, then how did I graduate? Now, people would say, I could say though too, well, part of the reason why I graduated was because my grandpa did like basically write essays for me. He was helping me out a lot. Like I would call my grandpa and I would like send my essays to him, and he would basically write them for me. And my mom was basically getting me through, like my mom did everything for me. My mom did everything for me, and my dad did everything for me. So yeah, a big part of the reason why I graduated was because I had so much help from my family. Now that's going to be ironic when after I graduate, how my family abandoned me, but I'll get to that. So yeah, my family was doing everything for me. My mom was helping me with all my stuff. She would sign up for my classes. She did all that stuff for me. She signed up for my classes. She did everything for me. So, maybe you could argue that I was, but at the same time, my mom did that my whole life. And now this is another thing that people would say that's actually traumatizing. The fact that when I was a little kid, my mom did everything for me. My aunt told me that when I was little, I would go around my house and I would like open the drawers and throw clothes out of the drawers. And my mom would just follow behind me and put the clothes back in. Like she was basically spoiling me. Everything I did, she did everything for me, and she spoiled me. And to the point where I never did anything, and my mom did everything for me. My mom always packed my books for school. My mom made my bed. I never once made my bed. I never once cleaned anything. My mom did everything for me. So maybe that was an aspect of spoiling, to the point where, even in college, I never once did my laundry. I never did anything. My aunt did my laundry for me. Was I spoiled? I don't know. Or was I mentally ill? Well, how could you say that if my whole life that was the way it was? My whole life I never did one thing on my own. My mom did everything for me. So, that's kind of interesting. But my point is, that's what was going on at this time. And like I said, at the time, I was pretty much a Marxist, where I was very much for race mixing, and I was anti-capitalist. So I remember like we in one of the classes we watched this lecture on Hitler, and they showed like the Germans working hard and the Jews being shown as parasites and stuff. But I saw the Jews as the good guys, and I saw the Germans working hard. That's like capitalism. That's the, working hard. I saw that, I was a Marxist. I was seeing that as, yeah, for what reason? They're just like slave masters, and I was kind of like I was almost like on the hippie side. Like, people should just relax and just chill. And maybe and like I said, that was in counterbalance to what my grandpa taught. My grandpa would teach, like, yeah, all that matters is just work hard and go all out. And maybe a part of it was because I saw my grandpa and my dad as white, and my grandpa and my dad, I felt that they abused me and mistreated me. And maybe that also ingrained and entrenched my Marxism, my bent toward Marxism. But it's kind of, so now it's kind of getting interesting, because yes, I was a Marxist, but at the same time, I was starting to see things. I was trying to see, because at the time I was confused, because my grandpa would teach me like spiritual things. Like, he would say, what we think in secret comes to pass. The world is but a looking glass. And he would say, in the sense that you create your reality. But later he would try to tone it down, and he'd be like, you don't really create your reality. You just, your software affects your reality, but you don't necessarily create it. But Dr. Horace says you really create it. So my grandpa just confused me. But my point is, though, I was trying to follow my grandpa's teachings. So my grandpa would teach that you do kind of create your reality. And he was teaching these spiritual things. So I thought that when I was seeing reality as like a dream, I was following my grandpa's teachings. So another thing that my grandpa taught me was, he was like, do not be attached to anything. Okay? Because he was like, if you're attached to anything, you're not in the flow. So I remember, this is another example of like, this is a weird lecture. But like, I had a bike, and it was already had like rust on it. So I didn't really care. So ironically, like, it wasn't that I was like not attached to a really nice bike. Like, it was already messed up bike. But I remember I parked it at Remac, and I didn't tie the chain, because in my mind I was like, I'm following my grandpa's teachings. I'm not attached to anything, because like, I'm in the flow, and when you're in the flow, you're not attached to anything. But at the same time, I was attached to not being attached, and it was still, or was I in the flow? I don't know. Maybe I was kind of in the flow at the time, but my grandpa, but I'll get to that. So I left my bike at the Remax Center. I didn't lock it, and I came back, and it was still there, right? And so I did that for a while, but then finally one day my bike was stolen. So I was like, oh, whatever. But I was like, I'm not attached to anything. But at the time, so I didn't have a bike. But then, so I didn't have a bike for a while. But then, this is the crazy part. And I felt like this was the universe kind of rewarding me, and again, showing that reality is an illusion. So I wasn't attached to the bike, right? So then I'm hanging out with my friend Malcolm, who's a brown guy. And like I said, I always saw myself as Jewish, so I was always kind of anti-white. So my friend was named Malcolm. He was like he was like South American of some sort of South American guys. But I liked him because of that. Because like in my mind, I was always anti-white, and I liked brown people, right? Because I think it's because I saw myself as Jewish. But at the time, I didn't really understand that as well as I do now. But that's why I was always for race mixing. So like when the teachers would teach like, yeah, race is a social construction. I loved UCSD because it was all about race is a social construction, and there's no such thing as race. And I'd be like, yeah, and I was studying the Myers-Briggs at the time. Or actually, I'll get to that later. I started studying that later. But yeah, I was like, yeah, race is a social construction, and there's different classes of people. That's more important, class as opposed to race. And like a farmer in one society has more in common. A black farmer has more in common with a white farmer than a black noble it has with a white noble, and we should all just race mix. And that's the way I saw things. But really, I think it's because I saw myself as Jewish, so I wanted race mixing, because I always saw white people as a threat, and I wanted to destroy the white race, kind of. But that was kind of unconscious. Like, that's what motivated me, but it was kind of unconscious. But now I can articulate it. But I was always anti-white. But but at the time, I'm trying to follow my grandpa's teaching, so I'm hanging out with my friend Malcolm. And then this is interesting. So like, again, I was maybe going kind of schizotypal, because I remember like when I was hanging out with my friend Malcolm, they started saying sixes, and they said 6 3 times. And again, I would see the universe as giving me signs and telling me what to do. So like my friend said 6 3 times, so I'd be like, okay guys, it's time to not hang out anymore, because I would see 666. And so that's the idea of like, the universe was giving me signs through what my friend said, through what things were. So again, that's a symptom of schizophrenia, where you see it's over saliency, where you're starting to see significance in things, and it's a kind of what they call magical thinking. But at the same time, I saw the reality, and if reality is truly a dream, And there is, as opposed to the materialistic lens, like even my grandpa would say, as opposed to materialistic lens, if reality is that there's a supernatural spiritual element to it, then maybe Hashem or the universe, whatever you want to call it, does give you signs. And I was tapped into that. So like, my friends would say three times, and I would be like, okay guys, enough. But anyways, I was hanging out with them this one day, and my friend Malcolm, who was a South American guy, kind of brown, and he had stolen my bike. But I didn't know that. But I remember I walked outside of my apartment and I saw my bike. Remember my grandpa saying, don't be attached to anything. So I was like, I'm not going to be attached to anything. So I was like, and that was another reason why I wasn't having sex with the women, because I didn't want to be attached to anything. And, yeah, so I was trying to be like very not attached to anything, right? Because my grandpa would say like everything's an illusion. He was kind of teaching me this stuff, but I'll get to that later. When my grandpa started teaching me and how he ended up confusing me, but I'll get to all that. But so I was following my grandpa's teachings and not trying not to be attached to anything. So I just didn't even lock up my bike. And then so my friend Malcolm took my bike, but I didn't know that he stole my bike. But again, it's ironic, right? Because I'm hanging out with like the one brown person on campus. Everyone else is Asian and white, right? But there was one brown guy, and I was hanging out with him because I see myself as Jewish. So there was other brown people, but very few. And this was this wasn't an Indian brown guy, which there's more of. This was a South American brown guy. So I'm hanging out with him because again, I see myself as Jewish, and I think it's because I saw myself as Jewish. I always hung out with the underdogs, and I also saw myself as more black. So I wanted to be with the brown guy. So I'm hanging out with him, and then it's ironic because he stole my bike. The one brown guy steals my bike. Now you could say, oh, it's genetic, or you could say, oh no, it's because of culture, because he's poor, and that's why he does it. Or you could give whatever reasons you want. But anyways, the one brown guy stole my bike, but I'm hanging out with him, and then so I go outside of my apartment and I see my bike there. It was attached to my bike rack, to the bike rack. But I see my bike. But again, remember, part of the reason why I didn't care that my bike was stolen was because it was all rusty, and even the wheels were flat, and it was kind of messed up. But it was my bike. I would go outside and I see my bike, but it had new wheels and a new chain. It was just brand new. But I was like, dude, this is my bike. And then Malcolm was like, this is your bike? I was like, yeah. He was like, dude, I stole this from Remac. And I was like, okay, we'll give it back, dude. So he gave it me back. So I was like, this is a universe, reaffirming my grandpa's teachings. I was like, yes, everything's an illusion. I shouldn't be attached to anything. And I let go, and I wasn't attached to my bike. And then my bike came back to me. So I was like, so now, again, was I schizotypal? Was I thinking that? But yeah, this is magical thinking. I started to get really deep into magical thinking. I was seeing everything as a dream, and I was seeing so many synchronicities and so much stuff that was like really, I felt like it was just validating this notion that reality is a dream. So, but I always had that Marxist wanting race mixing bent and seeing myself as Jewish. And I still was kind of anti-religious because I saw religion, especially Christianity, as white supremacist. So I'll get more to that in the next lecture.